Commissioner Tassine, you look very dapper in blue.
I knew I was going to see you today, Kyla, so I was like, I should dress up. I should look professional today.
Feel very honored that you thought of me.
See, I like that your whole ensemble matches your whole scenery.
You know, it's all about the neutral tones these days. All right. So, let's go ahead and get started, even though there will be people trickling in, I would imagine the next few minutes. But welcome. Happy that you all are here today for the Juvenile Justice Policy Commission. We are meeting from 1 o'clock to 3 o'clock. And I just wanted to remind you that this meeting is recorded and the chat is disabled. At this time, I would like to invite members of the public to comment, and I request that your testimony be kept to 2 minutes. And there will also be another opportunity for the public to comment at the end of the meeting. And I think I'm actually just skipping the roll call though. So I'm gonna take it one step backwards and do roll call. I'm new to this today apparently. And I will ask Jenny to help us with the roll call. Thank you, Jenny. Sorry.
That's okay. All right. Commissioner Anderson. Commissioner Davala.
Here.
Commissioner Lebrecq.
Here.
Commissioner Detman. Commissioner Gielan.
Here.
Commissioner Kay Williams.
I'm here.
Commissioner Keast.
I'm here.
Commissioner Lewis.
I'm here.
Commissioner Murphy.
Here.
Commissioner Perez. Commissioner Rogers. Commissioner Rojo. Commissioner Tassine.
Here.
And Chair Armstrong.
Yes, I'm here.
Very good.
All right, thank you. And now we will go back to public comment. Anybody who would like to comment or make any remarks to the commission, please feel free to speak now. Hearing none. I do want to mark for the record that Commissioner Detman has joined.
Yes, here.
Thank you. I think that's it. All right, so we are right on time. We're going to jump right into the juvenile reentry presentation and discussion. We would like to thank CSG and Eliza Kaplan for their materials that were sent ahead of time by Kelly Lynn. So with that, we have Josh Weber on the call, and I don't know if Christina is on the call as well, Christina Gilbert. But at this time, I will turn it over to CSG for the presentation.
Great. Thanks, Kyla. Happy Friday, everyone. I think maybe you guys are being spared the weather that we're going to get here on the East Coast, so this might be my last chance to talk to other human beings for a while. So I'm going to share my... Anybody see this?
We can see it.
Okay, great. So just a reminder, since I think it's been a little bit since we were before this group. So I'm Josh Weber. I oversee the youth and juvenile justice work at the Council State Government's Justice Center. The Justice Center, we're a national nonprofit, nonpartisan organization. We work across all branches of state government as well as local government on improving outcomes for youth and adults in the justice system through evidence-based, consensus-based approaches. In our juvenile justice work, we've worked with the majority of states all across the country at this point on a variety of administrative, legislative, funding reforms designed to improve youth outcomes. We also ran the National Reentry Resource Center for over a decade, and so we've provided technical assistance to hundreds of Second Chance Act and related grantees all across the country. So we have a pretty good sense of what's working well, where there are challenges around youth justice, including specifically around reentry. The timing of the group's interest is also good because we were recently asked by another state and partnered with them. They had a legislatively ordered study of their juvenile correctional system. And so we've been partnering with that state to review all of the most rigorous research that's been conducted on what works for correctional and other out-of-home placement settings, reentry. And so what I'm going to be sharing with you today is the most updated research available on what works around reentry. I think before going into that, and folks, feel free to raise your hand or ask questions at any point. But it's important to define reentry. Not sure exactly what the group had in mind when you landed on reentry as a focal point. But from all the work that we've done, it's really important to stress that reentry doesn't start like 30 to 60 days before release. Effective reentry really has to include the full gamut of decisions that impact a young person's experience in out-of-home placement. That includes the initial placement decision. If we know from research that out-of-home placement is not a good thing for kids, that one day in detention, let alone longer stays in detention facilities or correctional facilities, have significant long-term impacts on kids' mental health, on recidivism, on violence, on long-term earnings. So ensuring that those facilities are reserved only for the kids that have the highest risk of placement is kind of a key initial decision that already begins to shape kind of best practice outcomes. In that respect, just for some context, Oregon, compared to most states in terms of its commitment population, has kids who have committed more serious and violent offenses than most other states. On the flip side, Oregon has the single highest commitment rate into state custody of any state in the country, not counting DC. So, certainly this group potentially looking at how kids get to a detention facility or a correctional facility in the first place might be warranted. Reentry includes not just kids going into OAA custody, but any kid who goes into detention for at least a few days. And my understanding is kids are spending longer in detention facilities, and so reentry becoming increasingly important at the local level. And then from that initial placement decision, it includes the intake and assessment process for youth who are placed out of home. It includes what happens when kids are in facilities in terms of services and behavior management and staffing. And then, of course, kind of more traditionally, release planning, length of stay decisions, reentry decisions, and then ultimately what kind of services and supervision and support kids get when they return to their homes and communities. So that was just important that at least as we're going to approach this conversation, thinking about reentry very broadly, thinking about all of these things as connected, and encouraging this group to think about both challenges, best practices, and opportunities, not just when it comes to OIA, but when it comes to local facilities as well. So as I mentioned, we've been conducting a lot of rigorous review of the existing research and kind of built this pyramid to help states understand the different kind of research components that go into effective reentry and better behavior for kids and better public safety outcomes. I think it's worth saying from the beginning, there actually isn't a ton of like empirical research in this space. You would think for all the attention that out-of-home placement gets that there'd be a lot of research. There isn't a ton. There's a lot of kind of anecdote. There's a lot of quote unquote best practice information, but we really wanted to focus on what do we know from more empirical research actually works. And so at the bottom, that is, a big question about whether facilities are designed in such a way that are amenable to treatment and kids feeling safe and secure so that they can benefit from any treatment provided in the facility and be prepared for reentry. The next level up is whether there's a broader kind of institutional climate and culture around rehabilitation, safety, and staffing. I'll go into all of these in a little bit more detail. Third is whether there is a focus on rehabilitation and reentry, and whether there's a commitment, regardless of what approach is being implemented, to ensuring that programs, practices, approaches are implemented in a high quality way. Next up is hopefully folks are familiar with the principles of risk, need, responsivity, and research really shows that that is the primary approach that's needed for kids in facilities in terms of identifying the underlying risk factors, driving their delinquent behavior, and making sure that kids get risk reduction services that address those individualized risk factors. And then there's some limited research on top of that around specific programs that may work better than others. And then at the top of the pyramid, but not unimportant, kind of a focus on quality assurance. So starting at the bottom of the pyramid, and this is something that a lot of folks don't kind of focus on and just often feel like you're kind of stuck with the facility infrastructure that you have, but states have been increasingly shifting from larger kind of state-run facilities to smaller, more closer to home, more modern, developmentally appropriate facilities. And that's because facility design really matters when it comes to helping kids feel safe, helping to reduce behavior incidences, and helping ultimately to improve outcomes for kids when they come home. The number one most important design element highlighted by the research is kids having their own rooms. Private bedrooms, private bathrooms, or it could be a shared bathroom, but private time to take a shower is the most important design element. And so again, thinking about your current facilities and whether they support that kind of infrastructure or kids are more crowded into shared spaces. And these design elements matter because kids who have a more history of trauma require more privacy and more space. So best practice includes living units, shared spaces that are small, that are open, that are designed to reduce crowding, no more than 8 to 12 residents, that are not restrictive. And that includes not just shared spaces, the bedrooms and bathrooms being the most important because that's where research shows the most behavioral incidences occur in facilities, but in also things like hallways to make sure that kids are not crowded and that they have space and free movement, that they can avoid unwanted contact, that they're not bombarded by noise and other stimuli that can make any kind of trauma or mental health issues worse. Part of best practice design elements are also kind of more modern and normative as opposed to more kind of institutional and old school design elements. So that's like more modular furniture, art on the walls, natural lighting, access to outdoor spaces, the ability to actually control lighting, heating, and air conditioning in residential units. So something that feels much more like a youth development center, even if it's a secure facility, rather than feeling like a kind of adult prison. And then last kind of key design element is that facility design should foster direct supervision of staff to youth. So as opposed to kind of the more traditional adult correctional model of like, guards somewhere looking at kids from up high or using security cameras. The more that staff are directly with kids, directly supervising their behavior, research shows that that helps to really reduce any kind of behavior issues and support kids feeling comfortable and safe so that they can benefit from treatment as opposed to indirect supervision models. Questions on any of that? Comments? Yes, go ahead, Director.
Thank you. I appreciate you laying all this out. Something that's helpful for me internally as I'm having conversations with other folks throughout the state. If I could get any references to the research specific to all these recommendations, that's helpful for me. And it prevents me from doing all that legwork on my own.
Sure. Yep, happy to share some of the key studies in these areas. Okay, so second after design is the larger kind of culture and treatment milieu. Research shows that kids' perceptions of facility, environment, and programming are directly correlated to their risk of reoffending when they return to the community. So some of this is based on kids' perceptions, some of this is based on comparing different facilities. But the first sort of core treatment approach is around a focus on rehabilitation services and reentry. That seems pretty straightforward, but a lot of facilities that isn't actually the focus, even if language is used otherwise. Obviously, detention centers traditionally have not had much of a focus on rehabilitation reentry when kids were staying for a much shorter term, but that's a much bigger issue now if kids are lingering for months or awaiting the outcome of their trial or their placement. Having an individualized approach, and then a larger treatment approach that is developmentally appropriate. So we know from research that kids respond much better to incentives than they do to degrees of punishment, that sanctions should be developmentally appropriate. And so having these kind of core principles guiding the treatment approach, both in theory and in practice, helps to all of these things research is better on in terms of reducing behavior incidences and aggression, both youth on youth and staff to youth. A little less research on public safety outcomes, but certainly some evidence around improved recidivism rates. The second key element is staffing. And certainly know we're working currently with many states across the country where staffing is a huge issue, including vacancy rates for certain positions as high as 30 and 40%. And so the ability to minimize staff turnover, as mentioned, to maintain high staff to youth ratios, the 1 to 8 to 12 is kind of the minimum, and much of that is required by PREA, but being able to go even further than that. And that staff are satisfied with their jobs and experience less burnout and trauma. Burnout is the #1 reason cited by staff in facilities for leaving their jobs. Increasingly, if facilities are facing staff shortages, then the burden on staff who remain becomes extremely high. Staff overload is an issue where they feel like they're taking on responsibilities that are above and beyond what they're supposed to do or what they're prepared to do. So staffing in a variety of ways really matters here. And from youth perspective, the more that youth feel a connection to a caring adult in the facility, that there's someone there that cares about them, is looking out for them, and they feel that staff are strength-based, they're not just constantly pointing out their deficits, but they're identifying their strengths and building on those, that matters for improved outcomes. And then the third thing here is structure and climate. So, a lot of this is like policy and procedure, that youth feel safe, that they perceive that there's a clear order and structure and policies and practices, that efforts are made to make youth feel like their peers are supportive, rather than kind of looking to harm them or not being supportive. Youth feel like they're being treated fairly. So is there a formal structure for youth to provide voice and perspective and to help shape facility policies, practices, services, and culture? And then very importantly, when incidences do happen, it's not the response is not individualized based on a young person, based on a staff, based on a facility, but that the response is policy driven, it is routinized, and there are clear and transparent outcomes. Questions on any of this stuff? Comments? Group is being very quiet. I don't know if that's a good thing or not. Kelly.
I have a general question on the emphasis on reentry planning and supports. Given that CSG does a great deal of work in the area, do you have a literature review or a meta-analysis or anything on specific reentry planning and supports? I'm thinking certain interventions like Ready for Wages, I think might be one of them, or some other very specific evidence-based programs.
Yeah, I'll talk about reentry services in a little bit, but there isn't like, there isn't like a well-studied kind of rigorously evaluated reentry specific model. There are other services, like I'll talk about multisystemic therapy, functional family therapy, that are evidence-based that states have used for reentry. The Washington State Institute of Public Policy has developed a number of evaluations and cost-benefit analysis showing that those kinds of programs, as well as other evidence-based programs, can be effective for reentry. But if kind of what I understand you saying, Kelly, like, is there like a soup to nuts, like, here's the reentry planning and facilities and the assessment and the reentry planning activities that then go into the reentry services? There's very few of those kind of models that have been rigorously evaluated. But generally, what research shows from the pure services perspective is that evidence-based services that work effectively to keep kids, preventing kids from out-of-home placement, generally states have found that they're also effective from a reentry perspective. And I can share some of that information again, as well as a follow-up, including like links to the evaluations and the empirical cost-benefit analysis done by the Washington State Institute of Public Policy.
Awesome, thank you.
So now getting into more kind of the nuts and bolts of the kind of case planning, reentry planning, and service flow that should be happening from intake facilities to reentry. So the first is assessing young people's needs and using a validated risk assessment tool, at minimum a mental health screening tool, potentially a trauma screening tool, substance use screening tool, to be identifying the individual needs for specific kids and making sure that correctional services and curricula actually are tailored to those needs. So in a lot of facilities, they do all these wonderful assessment activities, and then kids just all get the same service. They all go through the same quote unquote program. This is often the case in non-secure facilities run by outside contracted providers. They kind of have their model, and they don't necessarily specifically tailor it for individual kids, and often risk need responsivity frameworks aren't used in detention or non-secure settings. So not just having the tools, but really aligning the services that an institution is providing around those key needs. And we've been involved in some long-term research studies, including the Youth Protective Factor study that looked at thousands of kids and what mattered the most in terms of risk factors and long-term violent reoffending. And the risk factors that really mattered were kind of antisocial, criminogenic thinking, attitudes and behaviors, and family functioning. And so again, services should be individualized, but pretty much every facility should offer some service or model to get at those two needs. And what the Youth Protective Factor study also showed is that high-risk kids tend to get more responsivity services than risk reduction services. So responsivity services are mental health services. Even in placement, we found in the 3 states in the study, looking at thousands of kids, that kids were much more likely to receive mental health services than they were risk reduction services. But mental health services by themselves don't reduce reoffending. They just stabilize a young person and allow them to engage successfully in risk reduction services. But as a field, in some ways, some states, some facilities have gone kind of too far in the other direction to only provide mental health services, and it's critical that those are paired with risk reduction services. And part of that decision might also be kind of where to place kids. So if kids really do have a really significant like family issue as one of their risk factors, then a placement option that's closer to home, if that's possible, could facilitate more family engagement and would be more important. If the kid did have a really high-end kind of behavioral health issue, then a smaller, more intensive behavioral health service setting would be warranted. So again, it's just kind of pushing on the question of, are we doing these assessments, and are these assessments really driving where kids are placed and what services they're actually getting in facilities? And that should be reflected in their case plans. And again, we see lots of challenges with this in practice, that facility staff, intake staff will also often do assessments as kind of a checkbox. But then when you actually look at the case plans and the services that kids received while they're in care, they don't actually align with those risks and needs, and there isn't kind of an intensive focus while kids are in a detention facility, a correctional facility, treatment center, on ensuring that they got those services. And often this is because of staffing challenges as well. Facilities might have like line staff or clinical staff or community staff or different staff involved. And often those staff have different perspectives, different values, different incentives. And so we see a lot of the work that we do with states is trying to get all facility staff to be on the same page and have the same vision around kids' care. And then in terms of the services that kids actually get, like it doesn't have to be kind of a formal, alphabet soup kind of model, but it should be research-based. It should have a clear program model. It should be very clear and specific around what are the key risk factors that those services are addressing. And there should be training and support and quality assurance to make sure those services are implemented with fidelity. Also need to make sure that kids actually get the dosage of services needed to benefit from their time in a facility. It seems, that it would be fairly easy for kids when they're in a placement setting to get services, but actually a lot of research shows that kids in facilities don't get a high dosage of services, that between staffing issues and behavior issues and different issues happening in facilities, that kids often get pulled out of treatment. And so ensuring not just the right services and that those services are implemented in the right way, but kids get the full dosage and duration of those services to benefit from them. And then the services that kids are getting and the progress that they're making should be reassessed on a regular basis. And so best practice is to do risk reassessments every 3 to 6 months. To be able to measure gains in priority treatment goals and risk factors. And it's those risk reassessments that really should be guiding length of stay and release decisions, should be guiding reentry planning and ensuring a continuity of care when kids go back home. So again, that's often a challenge that we see, is kind of a disconnect between the facility folks and the community folks, both around reentry planning as well as a continuity of services. That if a kid has a risk factor that requires cognitive behavioral therapy, that time in facility should be seen as just part of the continuum of treatment, but oftentimes it's almost like they're starting over when they go back to the community, and that can be a real challenge. In terms of like specific evidence-based models or what works in terms of program modalities, there's limited research about specific interventions, but generally the most robust support for youth, young adults, and adults is around cognitive behavioral therapy, directly addresses that kind of criminogenic or antisocial thinking and attitudes. Examples of that, there are many states that use dialectical behavior therapy in all of their facilities. Some states use aggression replacement training, although the research there is more mixed. Some use trauma-informed CBT. But some, CBT has become kind of the new evidence-based practice where everyone calls everything CBT, but true CBT interventions supported by clear research, curricula, training, kind of should be the core of what's offered in any out-of-home placement setting. Often what we find is a mix of a lot of different stuff in the facilities rather than kind of a core focus on CBT and family therapy. That could include life skills programming, victim empathy kind of stuff, leadership, peer-based, cultural, recreational programming. Those can have important benefits for positive youth outcomes. That's not well measured in correctional settings, but don't want to discount that. But in terms of whether those types of interventions support reduced reoffending for kids in the community, there isn't really much, if any, research that supports those interventions, unless they were explicitly designed to target kids' key dynamic risk factors. So taking a real look at kind of the programming and curricula offered. The other thing, as I mentioned, that we really do know matters is family engagement and family strengthening. Research is clear that youth who have contact with their family, whether that's visits, whether that's virtual, whether that's directly family therapy, have reduced recidivism, have improved mental health, and improved educational outcomes and behaviors in facilities. And obviously, regardless of what specific programs or approaches, all of this has to be really supported with a robust system of staff training, wellness, fidelity monitoring, facility quality assurance, assessments, and ongoing improvement activities. To talk about more formal kind of release planning and re-entry, there is, as I mentioned, kind of limited empirical research, but the research that does exist supports a couple of things. One is being thoughtful about length of stay. Most research tends to show that lengths of stay beyond 6 months don't have any further benefits when it comes to recidivism reduction. And there's a decent amount of research that shows that extended lengths of stay can actually increase risk of reoffending. So taking a hard look at length of stay, and that length of stay shouldn't just be arbitrary timeframes. It shouldn't be 6 months, 12 months, or 18 months. It should be based on kids having an initial length of stay, based on their risks and needs, based on their treatment goals, the dosage and duration of services that are required to meet those treatment goals, and an ongoing reassessment of their readiness for release. And that should be happening, as mentioned, from placement inception. So that case plan, that initial length of stay, those treatment goals, those expectations around dosage and duration, and best practices to have an ongoing collaborative, whether it's a case management meeting, reentry planning meeting, youth family team meeting, places call it different things, but should be meeting on a regular basis to be reviewing those treatment goals, progress towards those treatment goals, and with an eye towards establishing the reentry plan and a continuity of care in the community. And those reentry meetings should include, certainly at certain junctures, not just facility staff, but young people, families, reentry service providers. This is more important than ever now that Medicaid and the reentry waivers allow Medicaid to be used for kids 30 days prior to release for facility services, both in detention facilities and longer term facilities. So Medicaid can support provider involvement and payment for services that happen prior to kids getting released. And it's important for reentry providers to be brought in early into the conversation, and so they can understand kids' risks and needs, the treatment goals, and provide that continuity of care in the community. And then 30 to 60 days before release, there should be finalized already a formal reentry plan Again, in a lot of places, we see kids like, scrambling in terms of reentry decisions and not really a plan lined up for them in terms of ongoing educational or vocational placement, that their family hasn't been prepared, and any concerns or barriers the family has. If they have behavioral health needs, providing for medication and other kind of continuity of care for older kids, figuring out housing issues if that's an issue. And then we see a lot of states kind of defaulting to step downs to another residential placement, but it's not always clear that there's standardized criteria for why a kid would go from a secure facility to a non-secure facility. There isn't great kind of national research on that, other than that we know generally the less time kids can spend out of home, generally the better, and if kids can be well supported in their homes and communities. So if that is a common practice, then kind of taking a look at the rationale for any kind of residential step downs. As part of reentry services, are there contracts with reentry providers? Are there providers that are specifically funded to work with kids coming out of facilities that understand and know how to engage higher risk kids? We see a lot of challenges with service provider engagement, with not accepting a lot of referrals, with ejecting kids if they're too challenging. I mentioned a lot of providers not necessarily being familiar with risk need responsivity and kind of buying into that approach so that kids are getting services that are tailored to their dynamic risk factors. So it's important, as you all think about reentry services, it's not just about the service, it's not just about the model, it's are there specific efforts to develop across Oregon a cohort of providers that have the training, the support, the evidence-based models, the relationship with the placement facility and the staff, and ongoing collaboration to support those young people in the most effective way possible, and not just to be providing them with services that may or may not be helpful. I mentioned the Youth Protective Factor study. Another kind of unfortunate takeaway from that study is that kids who got risk reduction services, as well as kids who got strength-based services, both kids who were placed as well as kids in community settings, actually had worse recidivism rates than kids who got no services at all. And there's a lot of reasons for that. A lot of what I've kind of gone through in terms of kids not being matched to the right services and evidence-based services, but it just reinforces the goal shouldn't be let's just provide kids with services. Services sometimes are not helpful and can actually do harm, and so it's important to have a really thoughtful capacity building and funding approach. And then finally, in terms of kids supervision and parole or post-placement supervision, oftentimes we see that it's lengthy. So when you add up the amount of time a kid spent in a detention facility waiting for a placement, the amount of time they spent in a correctional or non-secure facility, the amount of time they spend in post-placement supervision, that can often be 18 months or 24 months or more. That's a very long time for the state or the justice system to be in a kid's life. So really taking a look at that entire continuum and trying to be as expeditious with timeframes as possible to tailor those timeframes to kids' risk level. To try to minimize post-supervision conditions. Research shows the longer kids spend on supervision, the more likely they are to get a technical violation or a revocation, and to really make sure that there's revocation policies that are minimized, except if kids are exhibiting behaviors that are public safety risks. So that was a very quick tour, but some big picture questions, I think, for the group to consider. There certainly may be others. But first, it is out-of-home placement currently being reserved only for youth that have a high risk to public safety. As I mentioned, Oregon has the highest commitment rate of any state in the country. So it certainly raises that question. And if kids who could be better served in the community are ending up in detention, are ending up in placement, then it's not a question of reentry because it's going to be hard to minimize the harm that is being caused to those kids in the first place. Oregon doesn't have like required tools like a detention screening tool or required predispositional risk assessments that many states use, including locally run systems statewide, to try to make sure only the right kids are in placement. So that might be a question for this group to consider. Second are facilities, detention facilities, secure facilities, non-secure facilities. Are they structured, sized, and designed a way that meets the kind of design elements that I laid out and that would support kids feeling safe and secure? Probably should have said, obviously it's obvious, especially in Oregon, but number one priority is safety and security. But facility infrastructure has a lot to do with it. And so what kind of shape are Oregon facilities in, and are they supportive or are they hindering kids' rehabilitation? Third question is around staffing, and to what extent that's a challenge, and maybe not with line staff, maybe with more clinical or service staff. In a lot of states, the salary is just not commensurate with what is needed to hire and retain qualified people who are willing to work behind the walls. Post-COVID, the workforce changed. People want to work from home. People want flexibility. We've heard a lot about a new generation that doesn't necessarily want to spend a lot of time in any one job. So are there statewide structures and supports around creating a pipeline of staff who want to do this work, around retention, around competitive compensation, and around training and wellness? Fourth key question is around the placement treatment model, is around a focus on risk reduction and positive youth behavior management and family engagement and reentry planning. Is that the consistent model across facilities? Is there consistent training and support and fidelity monitoring around those approach and those services, or is it uneven or inconsistent? And so is there work to do in that space? Fifth is, how are length of stay release decisions made now? Are there data-driven kind of structured decision-making tools, risk assessment tools, kind of treatment matrices? There's a variety of tools that states use to try to make sure that lengths of stay aren't arbitrary and to try to ensure that the program model is built in such a way that kids don't have to stay for 12, 18, 20 months to get the treatment that they need. Are those tools in place in Oregon, or is there an opportunity to develop some of those tools? Last two questions. 6, as I mentioned, is around reentry planning and reentry services and providers. Are there intensive evidence-based practices like MST and FFT that are available statewide that can serve as kind of core reentry services? Are there Medicaid funded programs, including those interventions, which are covered in many states' Medicaid plans, that could support reentry services? Is there kind of an intentional effort to build a cohort of providers to do this work? So kind of where does that sit, and where does the partnership between justice and Medicaid and housing and workforce development? We've launched an initiative with a number of states called Reentry 2030 that is explicitly designed to bring all of these state systems together in a much more collaborative way and say that reentry, and again, starting with placement, is not just the job of the justice system, but Medicaid has a role, workforce development, education, housing. And so states are developing models to bring those agencies together, and that could be a key role or real benefit of this group, is to set a state table, invite those agencies, and have a collaborative conversation on how they could support reentry. So a lot of questions there, but I will stop and turn things over to Kyla, or just open it up for any questions, comments, concerns.
Thank you so much, Josh, for that very detailed presentation. Really appreciate it. And I will pause for the commissioners to ask questions. Feel free to just come off mute or raise your hand.
All right, Kyla, you just want, or sorry, Commissioner Armstrong Romero, do you just want me to come off mute?
Go ahead. Yes.
All right, thank you. Josh, I just want to say thank you for the summary. I appreciate it. And this aligns with all of my background and all the training that I've done and the things that we've implemented in other places and the research that I've read. So all of this aligns, right? If we do simple things consistently well. And I actually just finished saying this in a previous meeting. The beauty of working in this field right now is that we don't have to guess at what works, right? There is a meta-analysis that tells us what strategies and interventions actually have a meaningful outcome. What we have to do as administrators is that we have to implement them consistently well and ensure that our people understand the why behind why we do these things and really supporting them and delivering them to fidelity. So thank you for your work and your summary that you brought here today.
And I can, this is Lisa K. Williams. Yes, thank you for all this. And again, I would appreciate the citations to the things that you have. I think that would be really, really helpful. You mentioned education in terms of a benefit of involving families. And I just wanted to know if there was more, if you had more information about education services and what should be provided while kids are in facilities, what the transition should look like. You know, in Oregon, I don't know if you're aware, the graduation rates for currently and formerly incarcerated youth are very, very low. Of the years that I have available, it's like a 36 and 39% graduation rate. When you compare that to all students, who are about at 81 and 81%. And then even other foster kids, unhoused kids have a significantly higher rate. Kids who are experiencing other similar challenges have higher graduation rates. The youth, currently and formerly incarcerated youth, have the lowest graduation rates of any cohort that's tracked. And so I don't know if you have specific recommendations that the commission should think about regarding education.
I should have noted it wasn't included here because that tends to be, it's like an entire separate universe of kind of issues and challenges. Again, for such a covered topic, there isn't like a ton of empirical research on what works educationally for kids. You know, it's broad things like having a rigorous curriculum that is aligned with state standards, having teachers that are trained and supported. A lot of the issues that states face is like structural, like who's operating the education in a facility. Is it the local school district? Is it the state? Is it the facility? And that can lead to misalignment with like state standards and tests and rigorous curricula. There's also, again, a lot of research that suggests that a lot of stuff gets in the way of kids' education, so they're not getting the required hours. Generally, again, a mix of like modalities, both like hands-on instruction as well as more computerized individual learning have been shown to be effective. We did a research brief on this a number of years ago, and so I can include that in the resources that I send. You're right that like national research, and unfortunately I don't think the field has like changed that much around this, shows like most kids who are returning aren't returning quickly, if ever, to any kind of educational placement. That's probably gotten even more challenging as kids are older and kids are coming into facilities really overage and undercredited. And so there are a lot of challenges there. So a lot of work to be done, and would say like if the group is interested in that, that really does require kind of its own separate focus and set of stakeholders. But I, as part of the follow-up, I'll share the brief that we did that is more around kind of best practices and state trends. And part of it is also what you said, which we highlighted in the brief, and probably should have talked a little bit more in the presentation, is just the importance of data. We found that most states weren't collecting basic performance metrics on, more when kids were in facilities, but most states couldn't tell you like what percentage of kids leaving a facility, whether it's detention or a state facility, did re-enroll, how long that took. So a lot of this might be establishing kind of performance metrics and more transparency around the data to know to what extent Oregon's having these challenges.
Thank you.
Commissioner Rogers here. So I appreciate the presentation. A couple things. I do think we need to ask ODE because I think we do receive reports on education components. And so I think Commissioner K. Williams, that might be something that we continue to ask our ODE partners to come to the table. I was at a meeting previously to this, just talking about those numbers, specifically out of facility. The other piece is when we talked about this last time and kind of chose the reentry and the revocation and the kind of parole part as our conversation. I'm interested, Josh, if you have information or any data or best practices on what supervision looks like or what services look like, not in facility, but once youth leave, and what are the measures of recidivism or success that other states are looking at, again, for youth who are paroled?
Yeah. So on the services side, as I mentioned, the most important thing is kind of a continuity of care from the risk reduction services and the behavioral health services that kids have been receiving in the community, in the facilities. And that's a real challenge just in and of it itself. That could be through more evidence-based programs like MST or FFT or more generic kind of family therapy and CBT. But really wanted to emphasize the importance of like providers who are trained, who are supported, who may need, higher rates and support than traditional providers to be able to do this work, with a Medicaid opportunity to be able to start before release. So the most important thing about services is kind of a continuity of care. There isn't a ton of like empirical research around like supervision models specifically for kids coming out of facilities. Other than, as I mentioned, like the longer kids are on supervision, revocation rates increase. And so being thoughtful about kind of what's the goal of post-placement supervision, because everything's not going to be perfect, but kind of seeing it as a handoff opportunity to make sure kids and families are well supported with services and other kinds of supports, rather than keeping kids on parole for 12 months or longer. And waiting until everything is, as good as it could possibly be. There was something else you asked, Molly, that I forgot. Oh, recidivism.
Or measures of success.
Yeah, I mean, the challenge there, right, is just data. Like most places can barely measure recidivism, and places have different definitions for recidivism. Our encouragement is we encourage jurisdictions to measure recidivism different ways. Different measures tell you different things. So people like to spend like a lot of time debating on what their definition of recidivism is. And we say, like, if you can get the data, look at rearrest, look at revocation rates, look at petition and conviction rates, look at reincarceration rates. All of those measures tell you a little bit something different, right? If you only look at rearrest rates, then you may only be measuring police activity rather than, other things. And the more that you can analyze that data, not just generally, but like certainly analyzing recidivism by risk level is like highest priority, right? Like if OIA, for example, is working with really high-risk kids, then their recidivism rate, no matter how well they do, is going to be pretty high. While other states, if they're working with lower-risk kids, they should have a lower recidivism rate. Positive youth outcome data, some states have tried to collect it more. Pennsylvania kind of, I think, being a good example. They have a whole initiative called PACT, if folks have heard of that. That is like a workforce development and vocational initiative. And so they partner with the State Department of Labor and collect vocational data and more rigorous educational data. So that might be another opportunity when bringing those different partners and agencies to the table, to talk about data collection and performance metrics. And if a goal is to measure more positive youth outcomes, what that would look like and how do you capture that data.
Thank you.
Mary?
Yeah, mine is mostly a comment and a note for the folks on the commission. One of the things that stood out to me was just the role of family functioning that you highlighted in what the needs are. And I think many times while all of us know that, our system isn't always set up with that in mind. And one of the things you called out a couple of times was functional family therapy. And I just wanted to mention as a note, in Oregon, we did include functional family therapy in our Title IV-E prevention plan. So we do have Title IV, the ability to use Title IV-E funding for functional family therapy in Oregon. We only have one provider in Oregon who's using FFT and partnering with us on it, but just want to note that we do have funding for it and are happy to partner. We being, sorry, the Oregon Department of Human Services are happy to partner with any folks who are interested in expanding the utilization of FFT.
Do you know if FFT is also covered by the Medicaid state plan?
It is, but no one is currently using it because of the way that it's set up in Oregon. So we're working with the one provider who's doing FFT right now to set up a sustainable strategy for Medicaid billing for it. And you're going to use that as hopefully a model for other providers. That it has been a significant barrier.
Yeah, I mean, two things there. One, definitely highlight the importance of family engagement. And to Molly's question, like that's another area that we encourage metrics around. A lot of folks say they're engaging families, and then we say, like, where's the data that shows that around family visitation, family participation in treatment team meetings, family services. Families can be really challenging for this population. They're often, get to a breaking point with kids. But then that can turn to facilities and some agencies seeing families as more part of the problem rather than part of the solution. So it's a really challenging but incredibly important area of the work based on research, and might need some innovative solutions. Some states are trying to move towards a more kind of family navigator, people with lived experience, family resource specialists. In some states, Medicaid also does cover that as a service, and so that might be something worth exploring. And just more generally, like based on your comments, I think, one of, I'm sure, many next steps would be great to have a conversation between Medicaid, Family First, state funding, and say, if we've got, when you say there's only like one provider in the entire state of Oregon that's doing FFT, like that's pretty shocking to me. And so given the robust funding, potentially available at the federal level, are there ways to really work together to build state capacity around that kind of stuff that would benefit not just justice-involved kids, but could serve as alternatives to incarceration and detention services, that could serve as early intervention services. So again, that might be like a key role that this group could play, is bring those folks to the table. Brendan?
Hi, thank you, Josh. I appreciate it. As I'm looking at the presentation and thinking through, okay, I can agree with everything that was said, but like, where do we start? And really my question is, what's our bang for our buck? I'm looking at, for example, the principles for risk, need, and responsivity. And there's like factors A through H, all of which are important, but is there one that will push us ahead faster? And when we have limited funds, limited time, limited resources, is there anything you can point us to say, this is what to focus on first, then this, not to minimize the importance of any of them, if that makes sense?
Yeah. So I can't speak from the area of need, right? Because we haven't like assessed kind of Oregon's placement infrastructure and reentry practices. But from my perspective around value add, given the unique nature of this group, it would be some of the things that I've mentioned already. The ability to say, like, reentry is not just a justice system issue, but it is a Medicaid issue. It's a vocational issue. It's an education issue. And like, from a pure resource effectiveness, if you've got Family First, Medicaid, and probably state funding that could all be used for evidence-based practices that support reentry services, and you've got only one provider in the entire state taking advantage of that, and you've got administrative and other kinds of barriers, and maybe no one's coalesced a conversation, which we have seen in other states, that we've worked with to build statewide capacity around these kinds of evidence-based practices, then this group could be uniquely positioned to bring these different state agencies together and do some collective problem solving in ways that would benefit not just reentry, but but other kids as well.
Thank you.
Ike, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, so Brendan, you're gonna love this answer. It depends. So we have the 8 chromogeneric risk factors, and there's the big 4 that we identify, right? So we have the antisocial history, which is primarily static and not something that we can really change, but it does tell us a story about the person. But then we have antisocial personality, antisocial cognition, and then we have antisocial peers. Those big 4 have a correlation to recidivism of about a 0.2. The next 2 after that is going to be family dynamics and then drugs and alcohol. That is a correlation to recidivism of, I think, about a 0.1. Then you have education, employment, and then social rec, which has a correlation of about a 0.05. So if we're talking about what's the biggest bang for our buck, right, we're going to talk about the big 4. That's where we really want to put our efforts. But again, the reason why I say it depends is because there's going to be some other factors that are going to help us that might be the antecedent to some of those big 4 issues. And the thing that I've learned throughout my career is the family is always your sustainability plan. No matter how dysfunctional the family is, no matter how much harm has happened to that young person because of their family, the child always returns to the family of origin. So we have to take that into consideration and also take into account that is our sustainability plan, is the family, no matter how dysfunctional they are.
And I think to that end, that's consistent, actually with my kind of encouragement, which is whether it's FFT or MST or dialectical behavior therapy, like those are cognitive behavioral therapy approaches. And so, do you have providers in the state that are willing to work with high-risk kids, that have the training, that may need to be paid and compensated so they can hire and retain staff to do this work? And those folks and those staff could work behind the walls. They could work to prevent kids from being incarcerated. They could work as a reentry service. But, when I mentioned the Youth Protective Factor study a couple times, when we asked states, like, why weren't the right kids, like, matched the right services? And some of the response was like, well, the services don't exist, or the services exist, but they don't have any staff, or the staff and services exist, but they have no training and they have no quality assurance. So there's a large, like, provider training and support and capacity building need here, especially for the highest risk kids in the state who most need services, that you also might want to think about, like, is anyone in the state like providing that kind of leadership for the provider community? And if not, that might be an opportunity for this group as well. Molly?
Yeah, so a couple pieces to the last part is I really do think we need to engage conversation with the providers on why they're not willing to come to the table and figure out what is going on in that world. Is it workforce? Is it regulation? I represent rural. Is it, how do you do it in a rural model and an urban model and make it work together? How do those things happen? Josh, you brought up a few times now, 11 or the FCAA, so the Medicaid inside facilities. Oregon has chosen not to do that at this moment in time, and it is only for 30 days once they're released from carceral setting. And so are there any tables, levers, anything that we can as a JJPC to have a conversation with OHA to move that needle a little bit,
Yeah.
because that
So-
isn't being served.
So I'd have to check. I know enough about Medicaid to be dangerous, but I wouldn't call myself an expert. I would have to check with our Medicaid folks, but I don't think it's optional. I think it's law unless they got some sort of exemption.
Oh, it's a long conversation, Josh, that I'm very,
Okay.
very intimately know about, and push all of those buttons all of the time. So for OYA, it's a bigger topic than it is for detention facilities because it's post adjudication, and very few young people are in detention facilities post adjudication. But so it really is a partnership with the Oregon Youth Authority, but it really could be a conversation on the reentry.
Yeah.
Dialogue for the 30 days prior to instead of just the
Yeah.
30 days after.
Yeah, I mean, and there's all sorts of intersections here, right, with behavioral health and Medicaid and continuity of care, and they're probably funding like a bunch of stuff that could be helpful. So, yeah, I don't know like the politics in the background, but one next step might be bringing them to this table or having some behind the scenes conversations. If we can be helpful, we can share examples of what other states are doing. Like all states are still trying to figure out how this works, but it's a funding, efficiency, and service opportunity. So not sure why states would want to say no to like free federal dollars, especially in this fiscal climate. Mike?
And especially programs that we know that yield positive outcomes for young people and communities, right? So it's a win-win-win. In my experience, I mean, FFT and MST were really always kind of the foundational practices and principles. And I was lucky enough to have an MST leader early in my career who taught me young person always returns to their family of origin. Your best thing, no matter how dysfunctional family is, help that person be successful within that family, and help that family kind of help manage their dysfunction differently. But we've kind of looked at that carceral, kind of like that 30 days, the waiver that they're working on. You can do the 30 days before and kind of reach in, and then the 30 days after. We've looked at that. We're already doing that work. Our probation and parole officers are already doing that work. They're already engaging with that person even when they start in any of our close custody facilities. Now, what we're working to get better at is at the moment they start, how do we start talking about transition and reentry at the moment of intake, right? We need to get better at that. That's something we're working on. We're actually proactively in the middle of implementing those practices. I know that's a place where we need to get better. But as far as like the in-reach before, we're already doing some of that. But there's still some gaps that exist because we have to make sure there's capacity and alignment in the community of where they're going. And then there's some other things where there's some transition issues for us. One example of that is if somebody is leaving a close custody facility, going to the community, they need to continue in high school, but it doesn't match when a semester is starting, they're told to wait. Well, we all know like momentum for these young people being told to wait, that ain't going to help them be successful in getting to school. And we all know that getting your education, getting your high school diploma clears barriers for you moving forward. So
Yeah.
there are some things that we need to look at: capacity in the community, transition strategies, in partnership at the local level, and alignment. And then we also have to talk about geographical differences.
Ella?
I think the one thing that we haven't really highlighted is the fact that the commission is required to look at racial and ethnic disparities and inequities, and the research around the efficacy of FFT and MST for youth of color, particularly Black and Brown youth. I think that is a piece that is important. And I know that there are significant disparities in the efficacy of those two models in particular, even though they are evidence-based, in terms of the impact of on youth of color.
Yeah, I think the research on most services, as I mentioned, but including evidence-based services in like the quote unquote real world is definitely more mixed, and that there are a lot of implementation issues. The research also shows both in facilities and in the community that having some alignment between the therapist and the population being served in terms of demographics and culture and other things also does matter. And so that's partly like, again, like a provider and a workforce issue, and is part of the cultivation of the provider community, including more non-traditional and grassroots organizations. Kind of, where do mentors and credible messengers fit into this? So I think it's an important conversation around not just providers more generally, but like who those providers are and what efforts are being made to build the capacity of a diverse array of providers. Also, to your point, it's where kind of the more robust data you have, the better, and to be able to look at things like length of stay, like recidivism, and break that out by different demographic groups, whether that's geographic or demographic or gender and other ways, to be able to identify not just are we like quote unquote successful, but are we doing better or worse with certain populations that can allow for more targeted interventions.
Thank you. So there were a couple questions that were posed to the commission that were sent in advance, and I do want to bring those questions forward And thank you to Kelly for sending this out to the commissioners. The two questions that we asked that you consider, that the commissioners consider, were what specific reentry areas is the JJPC best positioned to support throughout the state? And where in Oregon is reentry going really well? So facilities, providers, any specific examples that you all have, perhaps subject matter expertise in these areas, that would be helpful. And we have a few other questions, but we'll start with those two. When these were sent to you all, did anything immediately come to mind? Commissioner Tse.
Thank you, Commissioner Armstrong Romero. So I have about 4 pages worth of notes on these two questions. So it might be easier if I just share them with the group rather than trying to talk through them. I would say like the biggest thing for us is that reentry works best where planning, access, and community capacity align. And then we create struggles when even one of those break down. So it really is about continuity of care between what we're trying to provide inside and how do we translate that outside. And this is one of the things that I'm trying to get OYA more thoughtful about is that, one, we have to create safe and secure environments, because when we create safe environments, it allows people to access their whole brain, allows them to engage in treatment and education in a thoughtful, meaningful way. We have work to do in that space. I think everyone in this room is aware of that. Once we do that and we create that, we start providing those interventions, we need to make sure that we have a really clear bridge between what we're providing here and what's provided outside. What I don't want to have happen is, oh, you're doing this kind of treatment here and now you have to start over with something completely new. How do we provide that continuity of care? And then when I'm thinking about close custody, the question that we have to start asking ourselves is, what is the purpose of close custody? It really is about keeping the community safe, right? That's the way I see it. I'm sure there's other perspectives, right, beyond that, but that's our primary purpose. This person has caused harm to the community. We had to remove them from the community because of the harm that they were causing. And so at what point have we mitigated enough risk to where that person can maybe continue that treatment in the community? And then how do we ensure that continuity of care throughout? Those are some of the thoughts that I'm having kind of offhand, but I'll share these notes with you all. My team was able to kind of talk to their folks, and these were the themes that became most apparent to us.
Thanks, May. And I just have a follow-up question for you, maybe Commissioner Tse. There was a report that was sent to the Ways and Means Joint Committee on Ways and Means in 2022 from OYA. And the report detailed cascading challenges that face providers, and that included the pandemic's impact on staffing and the complexity of youth needs as it pertained to the loss of community residential treatment providers. Does that impact, or I know 2022 sometimes, I guess, feels like ages ago, and I don't know if the current situation has improved in terms of community treatment provider availability and how that impacts youth transitioning from close custody into the community. Is that something that you think is being solved at any level, or is it something that you think warrants more conversation?
Thank you, Commissioner Armstrong Romero. Number one, please send me that report. I have not read that. I will be completely transparent. I've read a lot in the last 5 months that I've been here, but I have not read that one. I'm happy to dig into that.
I expect you to read everything that there is in the way.
But please send it to me. I'm interested. I mean, there's some things where it's just like, yeah, there's still some truth to the fact of like, yeah, there's some things that we're still trying to kind of work through when it comes to staffing. But I would say that, that frontline staffing that we've talked about historically, that's not true in the way that it was true before, right? The other thing is that when it comes to our QMHPs, we are still struggling there, and we need to implement some different strategies to really start improving that vacancy rate. So there's some strategies that I've used in previous jobs. One, I'd love to see if we could start doing paid internships for a master's level advanced placement. Because when I've done paid internships before, like you get to choose the cream of the crop, right? You're not just stuck with whoever you get. And the other thing is that I'm paying you, so I have expectations of you show up, you do the job, all those good things. So I'm exploring what we can do there. But that is a place where we have an opportunity to grow. And then also the quality of treatment and care that we provide that is more targeted, as Josh has walked us through here today. So that's a place where I've identified that we need to really focus our effort. My whole career has been at the intersection of criminal justice and behavioral health. So if anyone in OYA is surprised that I'm concerned about our behavioral health strategies, they shouldn't be. I've said it in basically every interview before I got here. So yeah, we still need some different strategies. We can't just continue to post positions and just hope and pray and cross our fingers that people are going to apply. Hope is not a strategy. So yeah, I need to keep hope, right? I don't need to let that go. But we have to try new things in order to try and kind of address those deficiencies there. But even then, even if we had all those QMHP positions filled, I still want to make sure that we're implementing the right strategy and that we're providing the right care that is targeting criminogenic risk factors that we know is going to help them be successful in the long run. So yes, at the end of the day, we are serving a whole person. I'm never going to ignore that. But the best thing I can do at OYA is to prevent this person from re-entering back into the criminal justice system. That creates the best path for them to do the rest of the work that they have to do in their life, right? I'm 44. I haven't been in the criminal justice system, and I'm still working through all my stuff, right? I still got to go to therapy, right? I still got work to do, but I don't have to deal with those barriers, right? So if we can clear that hurdle for them, I feel like we've done them a great service. And that's my primary focus right now.
Well, and Commissioner Tessina, I appreciate your vulnerability and openness in sharing that in this public meeting. I do want to say that it is encouraging to hear about your focus on behavioral health and the internal strategy of OYA. And my question was really related to the community residential treatment providers and programs. There's in the report, it was outlined that 9 residential treatment providers ended their contracts with OYA between 2019 and 2022, and that resulted in a net loss of 119 beds. And so, like, understanding the current state of all we have closed custody facilities and 2 treatment providers, or residential providers. I think that Commissioner Gielen, who talked about FFT and the knowledge of the fact that there's 1 provider across the state, that's a huge barrier. And it would be helpful to know maybe how many step down facilities or not facilities, providers there are, and if that's still an issue or if the issue persists or has increased since 2022. I think that would help in this conversation overall for reentry. And Commissioner Lisa K. Williams, I do see your hand raised, but Commissioner Tessine.
Okay, so I can tell you since 2020, we have added 8 new providers and we've lost 8 providers. But I don't know the total number of beds there. I'm still going through my notes here. I can tell you that currently, quarter 3 of 2025, we were utilizing 72% of all the bed availability that we had. So we had capacity and also allows us to move people to make sure that they're in the right level of care. And I will get you answers about the number of beds actually available and how that has transitioned over time. But I don't have that directly in front of me right now. Oh, I lied. Nope, I'll have to get that for you another time.
No worries. I'm just trying to think about where there are barriers as we're talking about reentry, and if we don't have places for kids to step down to, and they're they're quickly going back to where they maybe left and getting into some of the issues that they were leaving. Anyway, I'll stop. Commissioner Lisa K. Williams, please jump in.
Yeah, I was just going to switch gears and talk about education. And I think the question was, if I remember it correctly, are there things that have worked? And I do think that there are things that have worked regarding education, both in the the county where I primarily work, Multnomah County. And I think that it's a combination of partnerships between schools and other providers and the family, and someone who can hold the school accountable. I have seen in my career in representing kids that too often schools are very successful in not allowing kids to enroll when they have a right to enroll. I think Commissioner Tazeen talked about this in terms of like, oh, you should wait until next semester. Or I do think that there are some legal issues that we could look at in terms of enrollment and things like that that could help kids. I think that if you're looking at reentry from a detention facility, sometimes kids are in a detention facility for very brief periods of time. And we have done a good job, I think, in Oregon and certainly in Multnomah County of making sure that kids are getting access to education while they're in detention. But sometimes kids are disenrolled from their school, and then there are barriers to re-enroll them. And there are some solutions to that that could streamline those kinds of enrollment issues. Sometimes the kids we're serving their families are mobile. So maybe they were in one district when they were in a school, then they had an episode in detention. They go to another district and now they can't go back to the district where they had already been and had credits. And so I think that there are lots of things that we could do in terms of recommendations about easing re-entry for education while also holding schools accountable to allow kids who have a right to attend. And I do think that there are OA workers, there are certainly juvenile court counselors who do partner with schools. And I think that all is, and encouraging families to the table. I think that a lot of times there's some, I'll call it educational trauma or educational system trauma that families had experienced. And I think they sometimes need help navigating that system because if somebody wants to preclude a kid from enrolling in a school where they have a right to attend, I have seen schools unfortunately be successful in keeping kids out.
So just to clarify, Commissioner, what you're saying is related to the question about the specific reentry area where the JJPC is best positioned to support. You believe that would possibly be easing reentry for education? Or tell me, am I butchering that?
I think that there are a number of things that, there are a number of things that help kids be successful in school. Entry is one of them. And sometimes there are barriers to kids entering school that our systems create. And the other thing that I think is really helpful for kids is a partnership between the adults who care for a kid and the school. And so sometimes, of course, helping parents engage with the school to support their kids' education, that's number one. But I've also seen districts who I have had represented kids who have benefited from other system partners engaging with the school to help the success of the individual. I guess does that clarify?
Yeah, for our next meeting in February, would you be willing to bring examples of where you have seen other system partners helping youth navigate through school and how that's impacted their reentry?
Yes. I mean, I also want to say, I mean, we had a project in our office that I think that some of you are aware of, where we had a dedicated attorney and a social worker who were helping kids who were leaving OIA facilities and re-entering. We lost funding for that, but I think that was really successful in getting kids into school and having the social work support plus the legal work in terms of enrollment. And I have said in other meetings, I think Commissioner Armstrong-Marrow has heard me say that kids shouldn't have to have lawyers to enter schools where they are legally entitled to enroll in. But unfortunately, I think sometimes that has that has happened. I think that on the child welfare side, there's been some more partnership. There are foster care liaisons that in ODE that I think help with some of these enrollment issues. I really think that I would recommend that we have partner juvenile justice liaisons between OYA and the juvenile departments and education to sort of work out some of these enrollment barriers that kids face. I also think there are some ways that we've changed some of the statutes regarding enrollment. So kids who are in foster care have some more flexibility in navigating that system, so it's not so rigid in terms of residency. And I think that there are similar things that could assist for kids in the juvenile justice system because they need some flexibility to enroll in a school that makes the most sense for them and would promote their most success, or schools where they previously have had a relationship and have been able to be successful.
Commissioner Detman did put in the chat that I think maybe only I can see, but the chat is not technically supposed to be enabled. But I will ask the question that was posed, which was how were those positions funded? And I think Commissioner Lisa K. Williams, that not many people know about what those positions did or how they impacted youth and that connection, the importance of the connection. And I think maybe not now, but maybe in future discussions, having more specific examples of the efficacy of those positions and how they helped in the context of reentry. Commissioner Detman, was that your question, how they were funded?
Yes, exactly.
We had a federal grant.
Thanks.
And sorry, I see you, Commissioner Rogers. Just one quick question. If there was funding, hypothetically, from this magical pot that I don't know exists anywhere, but if there were funding, would those positions be something that would be helpful in this conversation? Like, is there data to show that there was support or that those positions were helpful with kids who are reentering back into the education system? Like, do you see what I'm asking?
Yeah, I can look for that information, which I think we have, and I'm happy to share.
Thank you. Can I task that to you for homework for next time? Thank you. Commissioner Rogers.
Thank you, Chair. So Sam Coe, I think we need to invite him to this meeting as a presentation if we're talking about education and reentry. And Sam Coe is the Department of Education, and he has in his portfolio JDEP and YSEP, so juvenile detention education programs, as well as youth correctional facility. And the transition specialists that I was just in a meeting, literally that was the meeting I was at before coming to this meeting, and they keep data on re-enrollment, and we have under the new accountability funding from Oregon Department of Education. There's the programs have some accountability measures that they have to provide back to the legislature, and one of them is re-enrollment, and I can't remember what the other one is. But I think that having those partners come to the table and just share with us what the landscape is and where those levers are that Commissioner K. Williams is talking about is helping schools realize that they have to accept credits and how we do that. And I'm going to back us up. I really want to compliment Commissioner Tassine's work with the reentry. You're just not getting paid for it from Medicaid is my point. You guys are doing the work. We're just not getting paid. So I didn't, there was no anticipation that you weren't actually doing the work.
I know that. I just want to say we've had that conversation with Medicaid and they created some standards and we're like, but we're already doing this work. Can't you include us? And yeah. We're good.
Yeah, I know that too intimately on all of those pieces on why that's anyway. So the other part though is education, and really on when looking at the categories when a young person is ready to parole or leave incarceration, where there's some capacity to make some of those determinations, is how do we put some of these pieces in place to know that they're ready to be successfully paroled or leave incarceration, if there's the capacity to do some planfulness for that. And I think that would be an interesting conversation, is the intersection between readiness of youth and readiness of community. Because if those two things are aligned, it seems like it should work. But if they're not aligned, it feels like that there could be hiccups. I don't know where that data is. I don't know if I don't know where that particular data is in our system in Oregon, to know what that looks like and to be able to take a look at it. I look at annual reports, I look at average length of stay, I look at all of those things on a regular basis. What we don't know is the behind the stories of what makes it magic on certain areas of the state that have lower reentry points, or lower levels of success for kids leaving incarceration, versus other areas that have higher success rates of youth being successful when they leave incarceration. I don't know where that data is.
Would that be something that, well, maybe I'll pause. Commissioner Yellen, maybe you have the answer.
No, I was going to go in a totally different direction. So if you want to respond
Really?
to that, feel free.
Kelly or Josh, would this be something, to Commissioner Rogers' question, that maybe we can add to the discussion for next month? That you'd be able to get more data?
So this is Kelly Gwynn, CJC. I think there's definitely the opportunity to maybe not get the data itself, but understand what is available in the state of Oregon and what is available nationwide if we're interested in that as well. I do not anticipate being able to get the actual data unless it's already like in reports.
And just to close the loop on that, Commissioner Rogers, your recommendation for Samco to provide a presentation, I think that's a really great call out, and I think that would be really helpful. And we next meet on February 27th or March 27th. And I'm wondering if, with your connection, or Commissioner Detman, with you being the ODE representative, if you all, thank you so much for you to figure out if Sam would be willing to present to this group either on the 27th or of February or March. Thank you. All right.
Commissioner Detman, I'm happy to reach out and connect with Sam. Molly, I know Molly has a relationship there too, but suffice it to say, I've already sent a couple messages to Sam. I don't think he's working today, but I'll connect.
He's in my county today.
Well, that is really great. Thank you so much, both of you. Commissioner Keelan?
That's okay. I was going to go down a rabbit trail. I think we should stay on topic.
Are you sure?
Well, I'll just say one thing to keep in mind when we're thinking about reentry is also that some of these young people are themselves parents. And what we know about adult reentry is that being engaged as a parent is a big protective factor against recidivism. And so just thinking about, we do have partnerships between ODHS and OIA and data sharing and other things that we could look at around how to support young parents who are reentering the community, around parenting supports. Particularly also, we have investments in early childhood home visiting programs and other things. So just thinking about how we might be able to be partners in supporting young parents. It might be a smaller population of that reentry population, but just something to think about.
Who keeps that data around the young parents who are re-entering? Like, what, let's say it's 2%, hypothetically. Is there somewhere that data is kept? For young parents who may be transitioning from, I don't know, Jackie Winners or transitioning from somewhere that have children and they're going back to their children? Do we know that population?
Commissioner Armstrong Romero, I can ask our research team to take a look at that and see what we can find.
Would DHS have that information?
We only have information for families who have come into contact with DHS. So some of those folks would be, and we are actually working right now on the data sharing with DOC around identifying. We already have some with mothers, but of looking at fathers who are incarcerated, and trying to better understand and plan for incarcerated fathers and connecting with their children. So for those who have open child welfare cases, we may have information, but we don't have the kind of status of their incarceration other than potentially in a case note somewhere. So, but it is something, I know there's ways we're able to identify shared clients between child welfare and OAA, or ORA, or Office of Research, something in analytics. Does a lot of matching of data between our agencies and may be able to do a study if it's something that's not already being captured by OA or juvenile departments.
Great, thank you so much, Commissioner Keelan. We have about 25 minutes left, and I did want to just go back to the two questions that were posed. And where in Oregon is reentry going really well? We haven't really talked specifically about that. And there are some providers, I know we talked about the bed shortages and the lack of funding, but does anyone have any information on like Janus youth programs like Buckman or Atlas, Morrison, Counterpoint, or any information on Jackie Winters and how those places, how they help? Because I know that there's a very specific focus on independent living and therapeutic rehabilitation related to reentry. Does anybody have any information on those, whether those are working well, those models?
Thank you, Commissioner Armstrong Romero. I will reach out to Mark about any data we have about Jackie Winter's program, and I'll be sure to share that with the group.
From what I understand, Commissioner Tassine, is that Jackie Winters, it helps, like it allows you to practice community skills under supervision. And so maybe one day as we are touring sites, perhaps that may be a site that would be beneficial to see for the commission.
Yeah, Commissioner Armstrong Romero. Yeah, I think that would be great. And actually, I think one of the things that we tend to get hyper focused on when we think about juvenile justice, we tend to focus a lot on males. And so if we were able to go to Jackie Winter, it would also give us a chance to also tour Oak Creek at the same time, so we can have a better appreciation of our young ladies' needs and the services that we're providing there.
1000%. Anyone else have any thoughts about what's going well, or any providers who reentry is their thing? That's who you go to. Okay, well, since we're very quiet, then I'm going to call on someone. Commissioner Murphy, from a DA perspective, if hypothetically there's been a lot of conversation about youth who have more significant charges. Not hypothetically, there has been a lot of conversation about kids who have significant charges. And from the DA's perspective, in the community safety lens, what would the DAs want to see more or less of in order to feel like community safety is not at risk for youth who are re-entering back into the community who've had more severe charges? Commissioner Murphy? Right, well, I will then pick on someone else. Commissioner Lebrecht, are you available?
I am. So frankly, I see this from both sides as I work with clients who are both the named victim in cases where we have those very serious charges. But I've also over the years worked with many clients who have had experiences on the other side of the juvenile justice system, and we're seeing the long-term impacts on their life, sometimes intertwined with them becoming victims at later times of maybe problems with reentry. I can't speak to the prosecution's perspective on this. I know that for my clients on the victim side, one of the biggest concerns that they have right now is around the duration of no contact orders and supervision provisions in juvenile cases. When we're looking at these very serious cases, if we have somebody who is going to be out of custody faster, how long are they going to be on supervision? And then the ability for them to continue having some sort of no contact order assurance when maybe it's not appropriate for someone to be seeking a lifetime protective order or something like that against a juvenile offender or someone who was a juvenile offender, because now that's something that's going to appear on their adult record. So it's not something that I have an off the top of my head solution for right now. I just want to flag that that is one of the ongoing concerns, and I know it's not exactly what we're talking about here. But as far as community safety and specific victim safety for my clients, it's having some sort of assurance that as that youth is transitioning back into the community, they are still going to be able to safely live in that community as well, not feel like they have to relocate or leave, and not worry that there's going to be a lapse in ability for that young person to start contacting them.
That's such a great perspective, and definitely the victim perspective is one piece of this conversation that we have to make sure that we keep in the forefront as well, in terms of barriers and what does success look like. And so I really appreciate your perspective, and thank you for letting me call you out.
Anytime.
Any other components that anyone wants to add?
This is Commissioner Keast. I would want to, if we're talking about education, to be mindful of kids who start their justice system involvement while on IEPs or other sort of structural things, and then kids who need to be in them or need to be assessed for them upon reentry. I would want to be mindful of that detail as well.
Absolutely. And maybe that's a piece that Sam Coe can bring, is like the IEP lens and what that looks like for kids from maybe even the detention side going into perhaps commitment. what that transition looks like, and any data that is available on that. So, any other thoughts? One thing that I wanted to, oh, Kelly.
Yeah, I just wanted to chime in to try to wrap it all up together and bring it back to the September report. And I'd like to clarify the scope of the commission's efforts over the next few months. So from the discussion today, I'm hearing focus on youth leaving facilities and going back to the family, back to schools and education, and continuing treatment in the community. And there seems to be a lot of momentum, especially around the education component. And the next meeting, the focus will likely be on youth entering back into schools and education. Hopefully that is correct. Let me know if it is not. And the one clarification question that I have is the focus going to be on kids leaving closed custody? Or are we broadening that?
And that is a question to the commission.
Yes, that is a question to the commission. Is the focus going to be kids leaving closed custody? I know there's talk about detention centers and other facilities and places kids may re-enter from. And so I wanted to kind of narrow that piece down.
This is Commissioner Rogers. I believe that Sam can speak to both sides of the house. And so I think that would be an interesting piece. And I think there are little slight differences with some transition special. I think it's okay to leave it to Sam to present both sides of the house, detention as well as closed custody to begin with.
And I think more specifically, Kelly's question may be on the commission's focus. Like, what does the commission want, like the CJC staff and our TA providers to really lean into to provide support in order for that report to be completed. And I do just want to uplift the fact that when the commission was first discussed, or when it was brought forth, the commission was first named as an advisory commission, and then it was changed to be a policy commission. And the reason was that there is no statewide policy commission on juvenile justice. And so keeping that in our forefront, the difference between advisory versus policy. And we have to get to a point where, and not saying that we're there or that we will be there in the next couple months, but moving from gathering information in an advisory capacity to then making recommendations. I think that recommendations for policy or improvements in law or appropriation, there's no funding for transition specialists or community providers, etc. It would be this commission that would then propose such. And I think for CJC and our TA providers, that's the direction that they're needing. Like, where, in terms of them writing the report, where will the commission get to? And if reentry is the topic, which it is, thank goodness we narrowed it down. We have to get a little bit more granular. So Commissioner Lisa K. Williams.
And I know, thank you. And I did put something in the chat, which I think maybe nobody else can see, but I do know that OA and maybe Commissioner Tazeen would be able to more accurately describe this, but there are some statistics on kids who are entering OA facilities who are already eligible for special education services, which far exceeds the general population. But there's also a significant number. There is some overlap between having a mental health diagnosis and special education qualification, not 100%, but there are a significant number. I wonder, to Commissioners Keith's question about, are there kids who are unidentified as having special education needs when they enter the facility? And so I think that that's good to think about. Going back to our question about what does re-entry mean? I know we've sort of talked about this at a couple of meetings, and we have a report coming up in September, and we've talked about trying to find the right scope. I think from our discussion last time, I left thinking that re-entry didn't just mean leaving closed custody, that it was leaving OIA, that it also included being in detention facilities and re-entering. And I think that there are some similarities in terms of barriers that kids and families face. And I think that it would, because the barriers are very similar, I think it would be helpful for us to talk about both of those populations. And again, going back to where we sort of started this presentation about a huge protective factor for kids is being with their families. I mean, maybe that was Commissioner Tazeen too that talked about that. And I think that having re-entry, being kids back in their communities with family, is where we should keep the focus open enough that we can capture all of that.
I agree with you. And as a county director in Multnomah, one of the issues that is significant for our youth is that their housing is limited. And most of the kids who are in our system are kids of color. And many families have been displaced from North Portland or Northwest Portland. And now many of them are moving to East County. So Rockwood, Gresham, and families are living on top of each other, and gang violence and gun violence, and where there are places for kids to transition to safely with their families, and not even to add on all of the other complexities that are impacting our community currently. I think the reality of where kids are going back to in the concentration of them in certain areas creates its own set of challenges that may or may not be unique to Multnomah County, but it's something that I would be remiss as a county director to not bring up the fact that housing options are very limited and kids are dying on the street. And it's a very tough, sad situation currently in Multnomah County. So reentry, I believe, is not, I agree with you, Commissioner Lisa K. Williams, that it should not just be based on closed custody or OYA. So I'm sorry, Kelly, I was going to upgrade you. Kelly, sorry.
I just want to clarify that I did not intend to mean that reentry is only from closed custody. It's just a way to make the workload manageable, and where we should reach out and for literature, for data, which place should we start first? And it seems like with the discussion, closed custody was mentioned a little bit more frequently than other custody. So that's why I said that. But I totally understand doing all sorts of facilities and re-entering from all sorts of different points.
Thank you.
I do think it's important to look at re-entry if like with a focus on school or whatever we're gonna focus on, from other like custody placements that are not closed custody placements, as opposed to, and I think keeping detention in mind is valuable too, but I think of detention as like pre-trial, pre-adjudication detention. And I don't know if that's a re-entry issue. I mean, it might be if the child is not adjudicated within the court's jurisdiction, then they need to get out of detention and they're kind of free to go about their business. As opposed to if they're going to be adjudicated and then end up in OIA custody and needing to re-enter at some later point. So I would just seek some clarification on what we mean by detention.
I would have agreed with you, Commissioner Keys, if our detention length of stay remained at 20 days. But when you have kids who are in detention for 270 plus days, 930 days, that regardless of where they go, that's reentry. Like we're
No,
keeping these kids.
I absolutely agree. And that's why I didn't want to foreclose discussion of detention, even though it is pre-trial, it can be quite lengthy. And if a child is then not adjudicated delinquent, and then they are needing to re-enter, even though they don't necessarily end up in custody or award of the court or etc.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you. Sorry. Kelly.
I just wanted to flag the time. It's 2:55.
Thank you. So with that being said, our next steps, there is next month looks different. We have a in-person tour of the lovely Multnomah County Detention Facility. And I'm happy to host you all. We do want to just say that there is the tour, which is optional, and then there is the business meeting. The business meeting will still happen. And so we do need to try to get an accurate head count for those of you who will be participating in that tour. So let's see. One thing that we wanted to ask, Kelly, remind me if this is correct, if we were going to truncate the business meeting to allow for travel time.
Yes, that was going to be posed to the commission. It's scheduled from 1 to 3, but if you're there from 10 to 3, that's a bit long, and especially coming in from traffic in Multnomah County, maybe do a 2:30 or a 2. That's up to the commission. I would suggest so.
If Samco is able to present maybe for 20 minutes at our next meeting as part of the business meeting, and then we had a follow-up discussion regarding the homework assignments that were given during the meeting, would that give us enough time to then strategize perhaps 10-15 minutes on some goals for our March meeting? So having perhaps Samco's presentation, brief discussion about the homework assignments, and then strategies for our March meeting. And ending our meeting at about 2:00. Would folks do you think that's enough time?
I do not think that will be enough time. We can also just keep it 1 to 3, and if it just so happens we finish early, then we finish early.
I agree with that because travel time's relative on who's doing the traveling.
And it will be a reminder, it will be a working lunch from 12 to 1, so it will be catered. And that I believe, and I will double check, that there is mileage reimbursement for the travel as well.
So Kelly will follow up with more specifics, or Jenny will follow up with more specifics regarding logistics and the reimbursement, and also just we'll give some maps and some other things that may be helpful to commissioners. And then just a reminder, Commissioner Tassine, to look into Jackie Winters as an option for touring, and Commissioner Lisa K. Williams about the education components, education advocacy from the lawyer perspective. All right. I think we're in a good spot. We have 2 minutes. And are there any, oh, sorry. Okay, Commissioner Tassine.
Thank you, Commissioner Armstrong Romero. Do you want me to see if I can schedule us a tour for one of our scheduled times that we're together, or am I looking for something else? So I know that we're looking at a couple of the things for both February and March. Am I looking at March and April? We will make it happen either way. I just need to know what dates we're targeting.
It would be preferred to have the tour on our meeting date, perhaps. However, with that being said, I know people are very busy, so scheduling during the week, I don't know if I want you to have to navigate that very complex aspect. So preferably on our meeting dates, which would be March 27th or April, whatever date that is in April.
Right. Yep, we'll get that taken care of.
Thank you. All right. Public comment. I'd like to invite any members of the public to comment, and again, request that testimony be kept to 2 minutes. Is there anyone who would like to address the commission? Okay. Hearing none. Well, thank you so much for this lively discussion. Thank you to Josh for the presentation. And I look forward to seeing you all, most of you in person, next month at Multnomah County. Take care.
Thanks, y'all.
Bye.
Thanks.